guys, welcome back to my channel for another midweek mystery. The lighting saga continues. A lot of you in my last video mentioned that there were shadows behind me, which I knew, and I'm also aware the shadows behind me still now. I don't know how to get rid of them. I don't know how to set up my lighting so I don't have shadows. Maybe it's to do with the kind of lights I got, maybe it's to do with where it is. If you guys know anything about it, then please help me out. I am so technologically clueless. I don't know what I'm doing, and I just want to like make the best quality videos I can do for you guys, but it's just not my thing. I just don't understand it, but I'm trying, believe me, I'm trying. So this week we're talking about a case that's been very prominent in the news in the UK at the moment. You've probably heard about it. It's the Babes in the Woods. I just want to say as well that I know there are two separate cases in the UK that are both called Babes in the Wood. Both are pretty well known. I'm referring to one that happened in Brighton in 1986 of Karen and Nicola. So if you're in the UK and you've been keeping up with the news lately, then you've probably heard about this one. If you're more worldwide, maybe this will be new to you. So Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway were murdered on the 9th of October 1986. They were both 9 years old and they lived in Moulsecoomb, Brighton. Now they lived on the Moulsecoomb estate, about 3 doors away from each other. There was a huge sort of community spirit, everyone knew everyone. Nicola and Karen's mums were really good friends, and therefore Nicola and Karen were friends themselves. And although they lived 3 doors apart, they actually attended different schools. So they'd sort of like play with each other after school. On this particular day, they both arrive home around 3:30. So Nicola gets home from school, goes up to her room and changes out of her uniform. And shortly after she arrives home, there's a knock at the door, so Nicola answers. At the door is 20-year-old Russell Bishop, 16-year-old Marion Stevenson and another acquaintance of theirs. They're asking if they can speak to Dougie, who was a lodger at the Fellows' household, and Nicola just says like, Dougie's not here, and then slams the door on them. You see, Russell Bishop had a bit of a reputation and he wasn't the most well-liked person. He was 20 years old and was a roofer but wasn't really going anywhere in life. He was also a petty criminal, he'd steal cars, and was a small-time drug dealer. And he was also known to have an interest in younger girls, and both Nicola and Karen's mums had like said to them, don't go near Russell Bishop, he's not a good guy, like steer clear of him. So when Nicola opens the door and Bishop stood there, she immediately is a little bit wary. Now Bishop lived in a flat with his partner Jenny and their 1-year-old child, and Jenny was also pregnant. And Nicola knew this, but she also knew that Bishop was sleeping with 16-year-old Marion Stevenson. So as Nicola slams the door shut, she shouts out slag, aimed at Marion. Apparently after this, Russell just goes off to buy some drugs and steal some cars, as you do. So probably about 4:30, Nicola heads out to play with the other neighbourhood children, and all of the children in the neighbourhood are just playing in a nearby front garden. And then Karen comes along, and Nicola and Karen sort of go off to play together. Apparently they're running down the street, laughing, giggling, and they're doing cartwheels. Around 5 PM, Nicola's mum Susan says she sees the girls playing in the street. They're playing with some roller boots, and unknown to her, this would be the last time she'd ever see her daughter. Now opposite Moulsecoomb Estate was a park called Wild Park, and to get there you had to cross a very busy road. It was an A road, or you had to go into this like subway tunnel underneath the road. And both Nicola and Karen had been told by the parents not to go to Wild Park. They weren't allowed there. I'm not entirely sure why, probably because it was a bit of a dodgy area at night, but also because they had to sort of either cross this road or go into this dodgy tunnel to get there. However, this is exactly where Nicola and Karen head to. About 5:15, a policeman says that he actually saw them in the park playing in a tree, and he knows it was them because he actually went up to them and told them off because they were going to get hurt. And so they get down and the policeman carries on. This is like the last specific time that we know it was 100% them. However, there are a couple of other later sightings which we can be pretty certain are Nicola and Karen. About 5:45, they're seen outside a fish and chip shop on Barkham Road, and about half an hour later, about 6:15, they're seen outside another fish and chip shop on Lewes Road. Now the girls were seen by a 14-year-old acquaintance of them who I'm pretty sure lived on the estate with them, so sort of knew the girls quite well. And this 14-year-old said that she approached Karen and Nicola and said like, shouldn't you guys be heading back home now? Your parents are going to get worried, it's starting to get dark. And the girls just weren't really paying any attention. They were just having fun and giggling, and apparently Nicola kept saying to Karen like, come on, let's go over the park. Apparently around 6:30 PM as well, a witness sees them near a police box on Lewes Road, although we can't be 100% sure about that sighting. So then the girls' dinner time passes and they don't arrive home, and then it gets to bedtime, it's dark, and they're still not there, and their parents are freaking out because both of these girls are terrified of the dark. They would not have sort of gone out and stayed out past dark of their own will. They definitely would have been home. Neither of them wanted to be out in the dark alone. The parents obviously know their kids and know that something's up, so they call 999, who luckily immediately take it seriously, and a huge search starts, and this search goes on for almost 24 hours. Over the next 24 hours, around 200 police officers and volunteers search everywhere for the girls, and helicopters get involved, sort of scanning the area as well. The police contacted their teachers, the head teachers of both their schools, to see if anybody had heard anything, if like they knew of any plans that the girls had that evening, and nobody knew anything. Now really sadly, on the night that Karen disappeared, Karen's father actually wasn't in Brighton. A friend of his had been offered a job to deliver furniture, and he'd invited Karen's father Lee along just for the ride. And this is despite his friend being told that he was not allowed to bring somebody with him, he had to do this job alone. But regardless, Lee came along. And Lee actually doesn't hear about the disappearance straight away, because of course this was before mobile phones. They kind of would have had to have waited until he called home to find out what was going on. And I don't think he actually knew what was happening until the next morning when he called home. But of course he's stuck miles and miles away with his friend who's got all this furniture to deliver, and his friend can't turn around and just drop him back home in Brighton because he's got a job to do, and if his employer found out that he'd brought a friend along when he was specifically told not to, he could get in a lot of trouble. So he actually drops Lee at a nearby police station, who has to get a lift down to Brighton with a police officer in a police car. Now really sadly, whilst Lee's in the car, he's obviously hearing everything coming through on the police radio, and a broadcast comes through to say that the girls have been found alive. They're cold, but they're alive. And he like rejoices, he's crying, he's laughing, he's really, really happy that his girl's back. However, a few minutes later, it comes through that this is actually mistaken, and that both the girls are dead. I just couldn't imagine the pain of being in that car and finding out that your daughter's alive and safe, and then minutes later finding out that that wasn't true. Like I mentioned earlier, a huge amount of the public joined in on the search effort, and this included Russell Bishop. Now Russell Bishop was a bit of a liar, he'd sort of tell tall tales quite a lot, so he went around telling everyone that his dog, a terrier, was a trained search dog who was insured for £17,000. Now I can't tell you for certain that this isn't true. What I can tell you is that he was a small-time drug dealer, he was a petty criminal, he was well known for lying. It's highly unlikely he had a fully trained search dog. Now Russell Bishop was like on the front line of the search for the girls. He was hugely dedicated. He was like there whenever the police turned around, there was Russell Bishop. And the police found it a little bit strange because it didn't come across like a concerned citizen. It just came across a little bit weird to them. And they sort of like brushed it off. They're like, no, he's just helping, like it's fine. However, later on he made a very, very strange comment to a police officer. He said to a police officer that he was going to stop searching because if he was the one to find the girls' bodies, then it would look like he was the one who did it. And this was very odd because they weren't even 24 hours into the search at this point, and of course there was a possibility the girls could be dead, and in the end they were found dead. But there was also a chance that they could still be alive, and Bishop was apparently looking for bodies and bodies alone. The girls were found on the afternoon of October the 10th, 1986 by two teenage boys, an 18 and a 19-year-old, who had joined the search efforts. And they're sort of looking in Wild Park, and they decided to go into like the deeper woodland area. It was a well-known place where sort of like kids would go and play, but it was quite a lot of like overgrowth and a lot of like twigs and stuff on the ground. It wasn't like the best area. And before I get loads of comments down below like those guys need to be looked into more, they were the ones who found the body, I can 100% say they had nothing to do with it. They were genuinely just concerned citizens helping on the search effort, and they happened to be the ones to come across the girls' bodies. They're searching sort of in all the little dens that the kids made, and they see a pink jumper. Now Nicola was wearing a pink jumper, and one of the teenagers immediately turns to the other and says like, go get a police officer now. And so one runs off and one stays there. Now this teenager reaches a police officer who is coincidentally actually standing there talking to none other than Russell Bishop, and the teenager tells him what they found and says that he needs somebody there straight away. So the officer's quite elderly, he walks with a cane and wouldn't be able to get there that fast, so says to Russell Bishop like, run ahead, make sure that nobody touches the girls, make sure like nobody touches anything, I'll be there as quickly as I can be. So Russell goes off and the officer follows behind him. When the officer arrives, it's around 4:20 p.m, he sees the bodies and calls for the crime unit to come as backup, and they arrive around 4:45 p.m. So Russell Bishop has arrived there first, and he actually later told everyone that he approached the bodies and tried to feel for a pulse even though he was told not to. But the onlookers who were there, I know there were the 2 teenage boys, I'm not sure if like other people had sort of like come around in the commotion, all said that Bishop did not touch anything. He didn't come within a few meters of the girls. Now we can kind of guess why he would want people to think that he touched them here. The girls' bodies showed quite obviously that they had been raped and strangled, and they actually didn't do any temperature readings at the scene, which proved in hindsight to be a major error. But the police said they didn't want to like mess around with the bodies too much and screw up any evidence. They didn't want to take the temperature, and usually they take the temperature to try and pinpoint a specific time of death, or like as close as they could do. They didn't do this. However, later on they do find out the time of death would have been around 8 to 9 p.m. Russell Bishop is soon taken in for questioning. The police have thought he was a little bit weird ever since the search began, because he was just way too involved. However, this wasn't the only reason. Apparently witnesses had seen Russell in Wild Park around 6:30 p.m. just before the girls are thought to have died, and also was meant to be meeting Marion at 6:30, and he couldn't give the police a reason as to why he didn't turn up. He was questioned by a man called Phil Swan, and Phil Swan later said that it was so obvious that he was lying from the moment he sat down in that chair. He changed his story constantly. Everything he said sort of contradicted the last thing he said. When the police sort of like fought him on certain topics, he would backtrack on everything he said and say that he didn't say it. He was just very odd, and he couldn't get forward a single alibi. He said that around the time of the girls' deaths he would have been in a newsagent's, and so the police go and ask the newsagent, and the newsagent's like, no, I know this guy pretty well and he was not in here at this time. He said that he was at home, but he wasn't at home. His girlfriend Jenny was actually at work at the time, so their 1-year-old was being looked after by a babysitter, and the babysitter came forward and said like, he wasn't at home, he didn't come home at all that night. When asked why he made up the story about going to the girls and checking their pulses, even though he was told not to touch the bodies, he said that he wanted to be seen as a hero and he wanted to see if he could save them. He was able to give an eerily accurate description of what the girls' bodies looked like when they were lying there. Now bear in mind I said that he didn't come within a few meters of the bodies. Sure, maybe he would have been able to see in what positions they were lying, maybe where their arms were, but he was able to give specific details like the blood speckled on Nicola's lips. How would he know that from a few meters away? Jenny said that he arrived home around 11 p.m. that night, and as soon as he got in, the first thing he did was put all of his clothes in the wash, which was unusual. Apparently he told Jenny that he'd fallen in dog poo and wanted to like clean his clothes, and honestly, if that is true, then it makes sense, but it's just a little bit coincidental, don't you think? Eventually the police have to let Russell go. They haven't got anything on him, they can't arrest him, but they approach his girlfriend Marion, 16-year-old Marion. And this is some very dodgy, questionable ethics from the police, but they basically say to this 16-year-old girl like, hey, we want you to wear a wire and have sex with Russell and see if you can get him to confess anything. And she agrees, but of course Russell finds the wire pretty much straight away. I mean, I don't know how they thought that they were going to have sex, but of course he was going to find a wire. Eventually, I think it's a couple of weeks later, the timeline isn't entirely clear, but the police bring him back in for questioning, and this time it's all circled around this blue jumper. So near the scene, somebody found a blue Pinto jumper, and they handed it to the police and said like, this was found near where the girls were found, it might be important, and the police were like, probably not important, but we'll take it in anyway. Good job they did, because it has turned out to be monumental for this investigation. God knows why the police thought it wouldn't be important at any point, but they actually go round Russell and Jenny's house with this jumper, I'm assuming in some kind of evidence bag. If not, then still very questionable. And Jenny answers the door, and Jenny immediately says, oh, you bought Russell's jumper back then, I see. And at this point the police know that they've got something very important here. So the police push it a little bit further, and Jenny's like, well, it's either his or exactly the same as the one he has. His one has a red stain on the sleeve from where he was doing some work on his car, and lo and behold, the police have a look, and there is a red stain on the sleeve. So now you've got a sighting of Russell in the park around 6:30, and his jumper being found very near the scene of the crime. The police think they've got him, and so Russell's back in for questioning. Later on, they actually managed to tie this jumper exactly to the crime scene through ivy spores found on it. Russell, of course, completely denies that the jumper belongs to him, but he is quickly arrested and charged with double murder. Russell was known by pretty much everyone as being a dodgy character. I mean, even Nicola knew that he was dodgy, and she was 9 years old. He worked as a roofer, but like I said, was also a petty thief and a criminal and a drug dealer, all bad things on the side. A former friend described him as a habitual liar. He would lie all the time, and they said that he had little man syndrome because he was 5'5", he barely weighed 8 stone, he was really tiny, and so to sort of like compensate for this, he would lie about everything all the time and make himself seem to be better than he was. And like I mentioned earlier, he had a very keen interest in girls who were younger than him. I mean, he was going out with somebody his age who he had a child with and who was pregnant. He was sleeping with 16-year-old Marion on the side, but also people kind of knew that he was interested in younger girls, like even younger than 16. He was a paedophile, basically. Russell's trial started in November 1987, so a year and a month after the girls were murdered. And honestly, it was obvious from very early on in the trial that he was going to get acquitted because the prosecution team just blundered their entire way through. Everything went wrong. Phil Swan, the first detective who questioned Russell, was meant to be one of their key witnesses. He was the one who questioned him, who knew all of his lies. Like, Phil Swan was a pretty seasoned detective and so knew if somebody was lying to his face, and his testimony was going to be key to this trial. However, just 3 months before the trial was due to start, Phil gets suspended from the police force. He was accused of falsely claiming just £23 in expenses. Now Phil said that it was only £23, but also it wasn't false expenses, like he was claiming petrol from when he was driving around doing police business. But he gets suspended and he has his whole conspiracy about it. He thinks the police are trying to cover up some kind of paedophilia ring involving Russell Bishop and like all of his friends. Apparently there were videos of younger girls sort of like being spread around and the police were involved. I couldn't find out too much information about that if I'm being completely honest. But just know that Russell Bishop was a very dodgy character and Phil Swan thinks that he sort of had the police helping him out. So anyway, once he was suspended, he couldn't take stand at the trial, and so the prosecution's key witness, gone. Questions on the reliability of the jumper also surfaced. They said that just because this jumper was found near the crime scene doesn't mean anything at all. So what, it matched spores found at the crime scene. He could just been there a few days earlier. The jumper could have been left there a few days earlier. How were they supposed to 100% know that this jumper belonged to Bishop? Police didn't preserve the jumper correctly once they first received it, and so the defence argued that it was handled by all these different people and therefore it was contaminated and couldn't be taken as solid evidence of anything. But the prosecution were relying on Jenny at this point. Jenny was to take the stand and say that the jumper belonged to Russell. She would know this because she's the one who did all the washing, but she takes the stand and she completely denies everything. She says that she's never seen the jumper before. And there's also the fact that no temperature was taken at the scene, meaning that no accurate time of death could be said. They thought it was between 7 and 8, but how were they to 100% know that without the temperature? And this meant that the prosecution couldn't accurately challenge any of Russell's alibis, because how were they to know which alibi they were trying to fight against? He had all of these different stories, but they couldn't pinpoint a time of death. And this is pretty much what the judge said. The judge said to the jury before they went off for their deliberations that if they can't be 100% sure of the time the girls died, then Russell Bishop can't be charged. In the end, the jury deliberated for under 2 hours, and on the 10th of December 1987 came back the not guilty verdict. And Bishop celebrated in court. He sort of threw open the doors to the court and celebrated in front of the press. And he knew that because of the laws in the UK at the time surrounding double jeopardy, no matter what new evidence came to light, he couldn't be charged for this again. However, he could be charged for something very similar. In December of 1990, a young girl is kidnapped near Brighton and is driven miles away to this sort of like picturesque area. She's sexually assaulted and somebody attempts to strangle her and leaves her for dead. Now luckily she was found before she died, but it meant that she could identify her attacker. Her attacker was none other than Russell Bishop. Now there was no denying this one, he definitely did it. He was to serve at least 14 years in jail, but he was turned down for parole twice, meaning he spent a lot longer in jail for this crime. In 2005, the UK's double jeopardy laws are actually repealed, meaning that now if new evidence comes to light, people could be charged twice for the same crime. Now obviously since 1986 DNA testing has come a really long way, and Nicola and Karen's parents have fought and fought for new DNA testing to be done, and in 2012 their wish comes true. The blue Pinto jumper is retested. On the jumper, scientists find DNA evidence that 100% linked the jumper to Russell's home at the time, and also linking it to the girls. Now this is why it's so important that when Russell Bishop knocked at Nicola's door earlier that day, he had no physical contact with her, and why it's so important that the witnesses say that when the bodies were found, he didn't go anywhere near them. So how else was he to have this DNA on his jumper? Unless he'd killed them. They also tested a taping that was taken from Karen's forearm, and on this taping they found DNA belonging to Russell Bishop. It was a 1 in a billion match. So now they have everything they need for a new trial. They take the case to the Court of Appeals, where they agree that they can retrial Russell Bishop, and in 2016 he is rearrested in prison. Before I start talking about the new trial, I just have a quick side note here that I want to talk about. So in 2009, Barry Fellows, Nicola's dad, was actually arrested alongside a friend on the suspicion of rape and conspiracy to rape Nicola. The friend of Barry's who was also arrested on suspicion of this was none other than Douglas Judd, Dougie, the man that Russell Bishop had gone to Nicola's house looking for earlier on the day that she was murdered. Rumours of Barry and Dougie raping Nicola had been going round for years and years, and finally the police decide to arrest them. And honestly, there isn't much information about this online. But what I can tell you is 12 weeks after they were arrested, they were both released with no charges, so the police obviously couldn't find anything on them. I can't tell you if the rumours were true, I can't tell you anything. If they are true, imagine how sad Nicola's life was. To be murdered at 9 years old is one thing, but to be raped growing up as a child is just horrifying. However, 12 weeks later, both of the men were released without charge, and Barry has gone on record saying like, it's not true, he didn't do it, it was just another painful experience on top of his daughter being murdered. I can't tell you if it's true or not, all I can tell you is that they weren't charged. So on February 2nd, 2018, this year, it was announced that Russell Bishop would be facing a second trial, and the trial was to start on the 15th of October 2018. At this trial, it was the DNA evidence that got him. You really can't do much to deny a 1 in a billion DNA match. The prosecution weren't about to repeat history and make the same mistakes again. They went in there with a solid timeline of the night. They had arguments for every single alibi, and honestly the defence really blundered themselves in this one. Russell Bishop is now 52 years old, and he entered the witness box on the 23rd of November, and he painted himself as the victim, blaming Barry Fellows, saying that he was the one who murdered the girls, and he said that he was just being victimised by the police and that they thought it was him because he was found guilty of this other girl. But honestly, he only lasted 90 minutes before refusing to answer any more questions. He just said, I'm done, I'm not doing it anymore. And honestly, you will not believe this next thing I'm about to tell you. So when he was being questioned, he was asked obviously about the 1990 assault on the girl that he was arrested for. And he says that the only reason he sexually assaulted her was to shame and belittle her, and he wasn't a paedophile. And when he was asked what his definition of a paedophile was, his answer was someone who believes they're not doing anything wrong. My case doesn't come under this bracket. I mean, this guy is just sick. The girl's family sat at the Old Bailey day in, day out for 9 weeks before on December 10th, 2018, just a couple of weeks ago, a guilty verdict comes back. The girls finally got their justice, and this case has been so frustrating because the police knew who did it. From very, very early on, Russell Bishop was the first person they questioned, and eventually they got him. It just took 32 years, which is why you should never give up on a cold case. There's always that chance. And that is everything I have for this week's case. As always, if you've got any suggestions, please put them in the comments down below. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in my next one. Bye guys.